All right, let's get right into it. Today we're exploring a really powerful idea. What if our biggest crises, the political chaos, the economic instability, what if they aren't just failures of policy, but failures of perception? What if we're looking at huge, complex problems and only seeing flat shadows on a wall?
To really wrap our heads around this, we need a guide, and there's no better one than the great astronomer Carl Sagan. He used this brilliant analogy to explain just how limited our view of reality can be. He invited us to imagine a world called Flatland.
So picture this. Everything and everyone in this universe exists on a single, flat plane. Their entire reality, their science, their philosophy, it's all limited to just two dimensions. There is no up, there is no down. So what happens when a piece of our reality, something they can't even conceive of, intersects with theirs? I mean, they wouldn't see an apple. Of course not. The very concept of a three-dimensional object is completely alien to them.
To the Flatlanders, what they witness is just chaos. A mysterious dot appears out of nowhere, it grows into a weird, confusing shape, then it shrinks back to a dot and disappears. For them, it's not a single understandable event. It's a series of terrifying, inexplicable moments. And this little thought experiment forces us to ask a really critical question about our own world.
Are we the Flatlanders? When we see these crises playing out, things like rising poverty, crippling national debt, these endless political battles, are we just seeing confusing two-dimensional slices of much larger problems? Problems that actually have a higher dimension that we just can't perceive? And that right there is the essence of what we're calling the Flatland crisis. Our modern world can feel a lot like a place where real alternatives just seem to vanish. The philosopher Herbert Marcuse had a term for this. He called it a one-dimensional society.
What he meant was, in this kind of society, any real opposition, any truly new ideas, they just get absorbed by the system. Politics, culture, even protests start to feel like they're all reading from the same script. You get the illusion of choice, but underneath, it's all operating on the same flat plane.
The brilliant cyberneticist Stafford Beer gave a name to the invisible walls of this flatland. He called them variety squeezers. And they're exactly what they sound like, forces that actively reduce our options and squeeze our ability to think differently.
And these squeezers are all around us, aren't they? It's that this is just how it's always been done mentality. It's the intense pressure to conform to your political tribe. We're using old, outdated mental maps for a completely new world, and the media reinforces those old maps every single day, constantly narrowing our field of vision.
So, what happens when people try to manage all this chaos from what they believe is a higher perspective? Well, then you get the architects of control.
And in the 20th century, we saw two huge projects that tried to do just that. On one side, you had B.F. Skinner, who thought you could engineer society itself. And on the other, you had Stafford Beer, who wanted to build a kind of national nervous system to manage everything.
Skinner's insight was chillingly simple. He believed you could design systems of reward and consequence, what he called schedules of reinforcement, to guide people's behavior. Basically, you could program society like a giant slot machine, all in the name of the culture's survival.
Beer actually got to try his idea out in the real world with something called Project Cybersyn in Chile. He built this incredible operations room. It looked like it was straight out of Star Trek, and it was designed to give the government this real-time, godlike view of the entire national economy.
But here's the fundamental flaw in both of these grand visions. They are top-down attempts to manage a system from a third dimension that the people living inside it can't even perceive. So to the people on the ground, this control doesn't feel like helpful guidance, it feels like confusing, intrusive manipulation. This all leads to an even deeper question. If our perception is this limited, why? Is it possible the walls of our flatland aren't outside us at all, but inside? What if our very brains are the box? This is where the work of neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky gives us some really powerful clues. It turns out our brains might actually be hardwired for a 2D us versus them world. Our biology itself defaults to building walls.
So there are three key parts of your brain building this social reality. First, you've got the amygdala. It's the fear center. It screams threat in a fraction of a second, way before your conscious mind kicks in. Then, the insula processes disgust, not just for rotten food, but for people and ideas it decides are morally repulsive. And the frontal cortex? That's the poor, overworked manager trying to calm everyone down and think logically. It has the hardest job of all.
And what's absolutely fascinating is that we can see this in brain scans. Our brains literally respond with less empathy to the pain of someone we see as them. The divide isn't just philosophical, it's neurological. Our biology itself helps create Flatland.
Okay, so if we're trapped in a biological box, how do we get out? How do we even begin to perceive that third dimension that seems to be just beyond our grasp?
Well, for starters, we might have to rethink how we organize ourselves at the most fundamental level. Just look at an ant colony. It functions as a superorganism, a unified whole where millions of individuals act as one. The colony is all that matters. Compare that to us, so often trapped in what's been called primate game playing, just endless struggles for status and dominance. You can't solve planetary-scale problems with that kind of fractured thinking.
Decades ago, the philosopher Bertrand Russell saw this coming. He argued that for humanity to survive, we had to start thinking on that larger, superorganism scale. He laid out this radical roadmap, not as easy fixes, but as necessary shifts in our thinking. He proposed a world government to stop the 2D conflict of nation versus nation, a move toward economic equality to fix the root causes of that conflict, and stabilizing our population to make sure the entire system, our planet, remains viable for everyone.
The key thing to understand about these ideas is that they aren't just about changing policies. They demand a revolution in our perception. They're an attempt to see the entire interconnected system, the whole apple, not just the confusing two-dimensional slice that's right in front of our faces.
And that really is the challenge. The essence of wisdom isn't about finding new things to look at. It's about seeing the same old world we all see every day, but with a new dimension of understanding. It's about finally being able to see the apple for what it truly is.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought. If we could actually peek into that third dimension, what unifying, coherent shape would all of our confusing, chaotic problems take? What is the true form of the crisis that we can't yet see?